In 1971, at Stanford University, a group of ordinary students agreed to take part in what was supposed to be a harmless psychology experiment. They were split into two groups, prisoners and guards. The prison wasn't real, the uniforms were fake, but the roles became real, fast. One student, known only as Prisoner 416, entered the experiment with confidence. He knew it was just a simulation. He had a name, a personality, a life outside. But within days, all that began to erode. He stopped speaking up. He stopped making eye contact. He no longer referred to himself by name, just by his assigned number, 416. In his own words, I began to feel that I was losing my identity, until finally I wasn't that. I was 416. I was really my number. He hadn't been brainwashed. He hadn't been threatened. All he had done was play a role too well. And in doing so, he lost himself. Welcome to Mantis Library, where we explore the masks we wear in order to uncover the truth behind them. So why does this matter? Because most of us are playing roles too. The professional, the good student, the ideal partner, the success story. We put on the right smile, say the right things, do what's expected. And sometimes we win. We get the job, the followers, the approval. But what happens when you succeed at being who others want and forget who you really are? Because that's not just a psychological experiment. That's life. Every time we trade truth for approval, silence our real thoughts to keep the peace, or live for the image we think others want to see, we risk becoming like Prisoner 416. And the scariest part, we don't even realize it's happening. What Prisoner 416 experienced wasn't just a breakdown, it was a takeover, not by force, but by role, by an identity he stepped into and couldn't step out of. Carl Jung had a name for this. He called it the persona, the mask we wear to face the world. In Latin, persona means the theatrical mask worn by actors on stage, a literal face carved from wood or clay, used to project a character to the audience. And though we no longer perform in open-air theatres, the masks haven't gone away. They've just become more subtle. Job titles, Instagram bios, polite smiles, I'm fine, all good. You know me, always positive. We learn early what roles earn applause. The obedient student, the successful entrepreneur, the selfless friend. And slowly, we start mistaking that applause for truth. We forget that this is a role, not a self. Jung wrote, "The persona is a mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual." It's not that the persona lies, it simplifies. It strips down complexity to something digestible, something acceptable, and in doing so, it doesn't just hide us from others, it hides us from ourselves. The persona isn't evil. It helps us function, relate, belong. But when we wear it too tightly, too constantly, it stops being a tool and starts becoming a cage. The student becomes the perfect student. The parent becomes the provider. The high achiever becomes the brand. And soon, you don't just have a mask, you are the mask. So where does the mask begin? Not in adulthood, not at work. It begins in childhood, quietly, invisibly, through every smile we're given and every frown we're afraid of. We say something bold. A teacher says, "Don't talk back." We cry in public. A parent says, "Be strong." We act silly. Someone laughs, and not the good kind. And so we learn what's safe, what's loved, what gets rewarded. Bit by bit, we shape ourselves to fit, like clay pressed into molds we didn't choose. School reinforces it. Religion blesses it. Culture celebrates it. You become the smart one, the responsible one, the funny one. And eventually, even when you're alone, you keep playing the part. Because that role, that persona, kept you safe. It won you affection, approval, maybe even survival. And deep down, it felt like a kind of superpower. You knew how to be what others wanted. But here's the trap. The more you're praised for the mask, the more you start believing that's all you are. So you show up, polished, polite, put together. But behind the scenes, something aches. Not because the mask is false, but because it's incomplete. You've become legible, acceptable, predictable. But maybe you've also become unknowable, even to yourself. Wearing a mask isn't the problem. Believing you are the mask is. When the persona becomes your only identity, something subtle but devastating happens. You disappear. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." It's a quiet kind of suffering. Not the dramatic breakdown, but the slow erosion of aliveness. You keep functioning, smiling, performing, but somewhere underneath there's a hollowness, a feeling that you're living your life at a distance. Think of the CEO who runs boardrooms like a general, then comes home and can't switch it off. His children don't need a boss, they need a father, but he's forgotten how to take the mask off. Or the influencer, praised for being polished and perfect, who now feels paralyzed by the thought of posting a single flawed photo. They're not faking it, they're trapped, because the mask, once empowering, has become armor, and armor worn too long becomes a cage. That's the paradox. The persona keeps us safe by keeping us small. It protects us from judgment, but it also shields us from intimacy. It helps us fit in, but it stops us from being fully seen. And the longer we live in that role, the harder it becomes to remember who we were before we started playing it. But what happens to the parts of you that don't fit the mask? The traits that don't align with the role? The feelings you were told were too much, too aggressive, too emotional? You don't lose them, you hide them. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the collection of all the traits we repress to maintain the persona. Your anger, your sexuality, your selfishness, your ambition, your sensitivity. Not because they're inherently bad, but because someone somewhere taught you they weren't acceptable. So you became the nice girl and buried your righteous rage. You became the strong one and locked away your tears. Over time, these buried parts become strangers. They live in the basement of the psyche, unseen, but not inactive. And here's the danger. What we repress doesn't die, it grows teeth. Just like in the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where the respectable doctor creates a potion to separate his darker urges, only to become consumed by them. The more we deny the shadow, the more it builds in the dark, until it explodes in a way we can't control. Outbursts, burnouts, self-sabotage. But Jung didn't see the shadow as evil. Quite the opposite. The shadow is 90% pure gold, he said. Because within the shadow are also your lost strengths. The courage you thought was arrogance, the ambition you called selfish, the truth you buried to be polite. Reclaiming those parts isn't indulgence, it's wholeness. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your invitation to become someone real. The mask wouldn't be so hard to remove if the world didn't keep rewarding it. From classrooms to boardrooms, persona is not just tolerated, it's celebrated. You're praised for being the high achiever, promoted for being the tireless worker, liked for being agreeable, polished, efficient. Society doesn't just accept the mask, it pays it, follows it, elects it. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once described a waiter in a cafe, so perfect in his movements, so exaggerated in his role, that he wasn't being a waiter, he was acting like someone acting like a waiter. He had become a performance, not a person. And the more praise he got for the act, the more he needed to keep performing. Jung warned about this too. The persona feigns individuality, making others and oneself believe that one is individual, whereas one is simply acting a role through which the collective psyche speaks. In other words, you're not being you, you're being what your environment wants you to be. A mask the culture speaks through. You follow the script, get the likes, say the safe thing, play the right role. And over time, you don't even realize it's a role anymore, because the applause is loud enough to drown out the silence inside. When we think of control, we imagine force, chains, prisons, censorship. But that's not how it works in modern life. Real control isn't violent. It's subtle. It doesn't punish you for disobedience. It makes you afraid to disobey. Not because you're weak, but because your self-worth is tied to the mask. And when your entire value is built around being the good citizen, the real man, the perfect mother, you'll do almost anything to protect that image. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't come with threats. It comes with praise. Real men don't cry. A good mother sacrifices everything. If you're a true patriot, you'll support this. These aren't laws. They're scripts written by advertisers, politicians, even belief systems, and handed to you as if they were your own thoughts. And because we want to belong, we follow them. We buy the truck, stay silent at the dinner table, overextend ourselves at work, raise kids in ways that feel unnatural, all to maintain a role someone else defined for us. Jung said the persona feigns individuality, but in truth, it often makes us predictable. And predictability is profitable. It's easy to sell to, easy to govern, easy to control. The persona becomes a handle others can pull. Flatter it, and you'll obey. Threaten it, and you'll retreat. Ignore it, and you'll panic. Because if the mask falls, what's left? That question terrifies us, so we cling tighter. And that's how control works. Not by locking the body, but by quietly managing the image we believe we can't live without. When the persona becomes your identity, you're not just vulnerable to manipulation, you become ripe for exploitation. History has seen this play out with terrifying clarity. In Nazi Germany, people weren't controlled by brute force alone. They were controlled by a narrative persona. The good Aryan, a mask worn with pride, reinforced by schools, films, slogans, uniforms. Once you accepted that mask, obedience followed. You weren't just doing what you were told, you were being who you were supposed to be. Social psychologist Gustave Le Bon warned about this in the 19th century. He wrote, that individuals in crowds don't just act differently, they become different. They are no longer themselves, he said. They become automata, no longer guided by reason. That's the power of the crowd persona. It replaces self-reflection with collective certainty. Today, the tools are more sophisticated, but the playbook hasn't changed. We see it in identity politics. If you belong to this group, you must think this way. If you're a real insert identity, you'll vote this way. We see it in consumer branding. This is what strong women wear. Real men drive this. If you care, you'll buy this. Brands don't sell products anymore. They sell personas. Psychologist Erich Fromm called it automation conformity. We mimic what we're shown. We become the person that fits the mold, not because we're forced, but because we're afraid not to. He is not alone, Fromm wrote, but he is not himself either. This is how media, politics, and culture exploit the persona by offering ready-made masks and making you terrified to be seen without one. Long before psychology gave us the word persona, mythology warned us about its dangers. Take Narcissus, a beautiful youth who falls in love not with a person, but with his own reflection. He gazes endlessly into a pool of water. Entranced by the image of himself, he cannot look away, and so he withers and dies. It wasn't vanity that killed him. It was identification with an image, with a persona. He mistook the surface for substance. Ancient cultures understood this temptation and built rituals to keep it in check. In Dionysian ceremonies, masks were worn to invoke gods and spirits, but only temporarily. The mask was a portal, a moment of transformation, but when the dance ended, the mask came off. They knew if you keep wearing God's mask, you'll forget you're human. Spiritual traditions across the world echo this warning. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi said, "Know thyself, not your status, not your reflection, yourself." In Hindu philosophy, the concept of Maya speaks to this same illusion. The world of appearances deceives us, a beautiful mask mistaken for truth. And philosopher Nietzsche saw it too, in the way we abandon ourselves to comfort and crowdthink. Do you want an easy life? He asked. Then stay with the herd and lose yourself in the herd. It's easier to wear the mask, to follow the script, to nod along. But the longer you do, the more you risk becoming like Narcissus, in love with the image and lost to the soul beneath it. Eventually, the mask cracks. Sometimes it looks like burnout, or anxiety, or the haunting question in the middle of the night, why doesn't this feel like my life? You wake up successful, but disconnected, surrounded, but unseen. And then it hits you. I've built a life around who I'm supposed to be, not who I am. This is the moment of truth. The moment when discomfort stops being something to numb and starts becoming something to listen to. Because that discomfort is not dysfunction, it's a signal. A whisper from the parts of you left behind. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? What part of yourself have you abandoned just to be accepted? This is where the real work begins, not in fixing yourself, but in finding yourself beneath the mask. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole person. Not a perfect person, a whole one. It's not about rejecting the persona, but about wearing it consciously, using it when needed, and knowing when to take it off. It starts with a simple but radical act. Acknowledge the mask. Notice when you're performing, when you're pleasing, when you're editing yourself for someone else's comfort. Then, befriend the shadow, not to unleash it, but to understand it, to see what it's trying to protect or reclaim. Maybe your anger is guarding your boundaries. Maybe your fear is pointing to unlived potential. And finally, reclaim what you buried: the curiosity, the softness, the ambition, the voice you thought was too much or not enough. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the path, not toward perfection, but toward presence. So what does freedom actually look like? It's not a life without roles. It's a life where roles don't own you, where you're no longer ruled by your image, where compliments don't inflate you and criticism doesn't destroy you. You become less reactive, less desperate to prove, less afraid to be seen. You can say, "I don't know." You can cry in public. You can rest without guilt, because your worth is no longer rented from the crowd. It's rooted in something deeper. You still wear masks when needed, but lightly, like costumes, not cages. And that's the real power. When you're no longer pretending, you're no longer easy to control. Remember prisoner 416, the student who lost himself in a role, who became just a number. Eventually, he refused to eat. A hunger strike. It wasn't just rebellion. It was resistance. The first act of reclaiming identity. He said, "I am not this number." That's where his freedom began. And yours can too. This whole journey, from persona to shadow to self, is the arc of every mystic story. The hero who descends into the underworld, faces the darkness, and returns not with gold, but with truth. You were not born to be liked. You were born to be whole. So now the mirror is in front of you. Ask yourself, what mask can I remove today? And if that feels scary, good. That means you're close. Closer than you've ever been to the person who's always been there. You. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, stay mindful, and never stop exploring. We'll see you again in Mantis Library.